The meeting room was silent, a tension so thick it felt like the air had turned to lead. Amara could feel every eye on her, but her focus was locked on one person, Max, her manager. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar smug smile plastered on his face. His words from just a few moments ago still hung in the air, their venom sinking in. "Honestly, Amara," Max had said, his voice low, but carrying through the room like a slap, "I thought someone with your background would know better than to turn in work like this." Her stomach churned. Her heart raced. The room remained eerily quiet, everyone pretending to be absorbed in their laptops or papers, but the silence was louder than any shout. It was always like this, his words wrapped in polite venom, a carefully constructed insult that left her gasping for air but offered no clear reason to retaliate. He had done this before, several times, but never as boldly as now. This was the most public he'd ever been with his disdain. And yet, it wasn't enough to cause an outright confrontation. It was enough, though, to humiliate. Amara clenched her fists under the table, her pulse pounding in her ears. This wasn't just about the work. It never was. It was about power, control. Max enjoyed these moments, enjoyed watching her squirm, testing how much she could take before breaking. But this time, she could feel something inside her starting to fracture. "I'll make the necessary changes," she replied, her voice calm, though every word felt like glass in her throat. Her skin burned as Max's cold eyes drilled into her, his smile widening just a little, as if pleased with her response. He sat forward, tapping his pen on the table. "I expected nothing less," he said smoothly, before turning to the rest of the team as if she were no longer in the room. "Now moving on." Amara barely heard the rest of the meeting. Her mind was whirling, replaying the moment, dissecting the insult, wondering how long she could endure this. She'd only been at the company for 6 months, but already it felt like a lifetime. The excitement she'd felt on her first day had quickly faded into a dull ache of dread each morning, knowing Max was there, lurking, waiting for his next move. She stood up, gathered her things, and left the room as soon as the meeting ended, not bothering to glance at anyone else. She didn't need to see their faces. She knew what they were thinking. The other employees always remained silent, complicit. Some of them, she suspected, even enjoyed the spectacle, enjoyed seeing her, the only black woman in the company, singled out time and again. She strode down the hallway, heading toward her desk. Her hands were trembling. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, fighting to keep her breathing steady. She could feel the knot of anger and shame tightening in her chest, threatening to consume her. Her first day at the office had felt like a dream. A young, ambitious woman with a flawless resume. Amara had walked into the sleek, glass-walled building with her head held high. She'd fought hard to get here, long nights studying, internships, and years of climbing the corporate ladder. This job had felt like the final reward, a senior position in a highly competitive field with a high salary to match. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for. Max had greeted her with a too-wide smile, his handshake lingering just a bit too long. "We're thrilled to have you here," he'd said, his eyes flicking over her quickly. "It's always good to see more diversity in the office." The words had felt wrong even then, but she'd smiled politely, thinking it was just an awkward attempt at welcoming her. But the subtle digs had started almost immediately. At first, it was little things, him interrupting her in meetings, dismissing her ideas without reason. Then, the work assignments, projects that were meant to challenge her, allow her to showcase her skills, were quietly reassigned to others. Instead, she was given the dull, menial tasks beneath her qualifications, with Max constantly reminding her she needed to prove herself. Now, the walls of the office felt like they were closing in. Amara's desk was tucked away in the corner of the open floor plan, deliberately isolated. She had tried to build rapport with her coworkers, but Max's shadow loomed over every interaction. No one wanted to get involved. No one dared. As she reached her desk, she saw David, her closest thing to an ally in the office, walking towards her. He stopped beside her desk, glancing around cautiously before speaking in a low voice. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed. He had seen what happened in the meeting room. Amara forced a smile, though it felt thin, brittle. Yeah, I'm fine. Just another day. David shifted uncomfortably. Look, I don't want to pry, but it's not just me, right? You know? With Max. Amara felt a flicker of relief. David had always been kind to her, always made an effort to include her in the office's social circle. But even he seemed wary of pushing too far. She met his gaze, searching for something, an ally, maybe, or at least someone who would confirm she wasn't imagining it. It's not just you, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. But I don't know what to do. He's careful. Every time I think I can report him, She trailed off, not sure how to explain the way Max always danced just on the edge of crossing the line, but never quite did. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. Everyone knows. But no one says anything because... His voice dropped even lower. He's done it before. There were others before you. One woman, I don't remember her name. She left after only a few months. Same thing. Max made sure of it. But there was nothing she could do. He's protected here. The pit in Amara's stomach deepened. Protected? How? David shook his head. His connections. You know, the higher-ups have his back. He knows how to play the game. People like him always do. Amara's heart sank. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made it worse. Max wasn't just a bad manager. He was a predator, and the system was rigged in his favor. She had been drawn into a web she hadn't even seen until now. I'm sorry, David said quietly, looking genuinely uncomfortable. If I were you, I'd keep my head down. Get out as soon as you can. This place isn't worth it. Amara stared at him, her mind racing. Get out? Was that the only option? She had worked too hard to get here, fought too many battles to just walk away. But staying meant enduring more of Max's psychological warfare, more humiliation, more of that soul-crushing feeling of powerlessness. But Amara wasn't one to run. Not yet. Amara's pulse quickened as David walked away, leaving her alone at her desk with his warning echoing in her ears. Keep your head down. Get out as soon as you can. But she wasn't ready to do that. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let Max chase her away. Yet, the weight of what David revealed gnawed at her. Max wasn't just a bad boss. He was a predator, and this company was his hunting ground. The hours crept by as Amara tried to focus on her work. Every keystroke felt heavy. Every passing minute seemed to tick with a subtle but growing tension. She replayed Max's insult from the meeting over and over in her mind, analyzing each word, trying to figure out how to stop him, how to fight back. Suddenly, her computer dinged, a new email. Amara opened it, her stomach sinking the moment she saw Max's name in the sender line. Amara, the presentation you sent over was far below expectations. I expected more from someone with your qualifications. I need you to completely redo it by the end of today. I'll be reviewing it with senior management tomorrow morning. Her jaw clenched as she read the email. She knew the presentation hadn't been perfect, but it was solid. The deadline was unreasonable. He knew it too. It was his way of punishing her, of asserting his control. And he wasn't even subtle about it anymore. Taking a deep breath, she closed the email and leaned back in her chair. She glanced around the office, her eyes lingering on the other employees who seemed completely engrossed in their work, oblivious, or perhaps intentionally ignoring what was happening. Amara knew she was being tested. Max wanted to see how far he could push her, how much she would bend before breaking. But she wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Hours passed, the day turning into evening as the office slowly emptied out. By the time the clock struck 8, most of her co-workers had already left. The lights dimmed to the soft glow of the after-hours setting, and the office took on an eerie stillness. Amara was the last one there, still working furiously on the presentation Max had demanded. Her phone buzzed on her desk, and for the first time in hours, she picked it up. A message from David. Still at the office? She typed back quickly. Yeah, Max has me redoing the entire presentation by tomorrow. There was a pause before his reply. Be careful. Amara stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Be careful. What did that even mean? Was it a warning? Did David know something else? Something he wasn't telling her? Her eyes flickered to Max's office. The glass walls were dark, but his shadow moved inside. He was still there. A chill ran down her spine as she watched his silhouette through the frosted glass. The way he paced back and forth, it was almost as if he was waiting for something. Or someone. Suddenly, the door to his office opened, and Max stepped out. He spotted Amara immediately, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the dimly lit office, the tension thick between them. Max smiled, that same smug, predatory smile he always wore when he knew he had the upper hand. He strolled over to her desk, his footsteps echoing in the near-empty office. "Still here, Amara?" he said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "Burning the midnight oil, I see. That's what I like to see, dedication." Amara kept her face neutral, refusing to let him see how much his presence unsettled her. "Just finishing up the changes you asked for." He chuckled, leaning against her desk, his body too close for comfort. "Good? I needed to be perfect tomorrow. We can't afford any more mistakes, can we?" Amara met his gaze, her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "There won't be any mistakes." Max's smile widened, but his eyes were cold. "That's what I like to hear." He straightened up, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "You know, I've been thinking, Amara, maybe I've been a little too hard on you. After all, you're still learning the ropes here, right?" She felt her stomach twist. The way he said it, the tone, the condescension, it was deliberate, designed to belittle her. But she couldn't let him see that it got to her. "Not now. I appreciate the feedback," she said, her voice clipped. Max tilted his head, studying her for a moment longer. There was something dark, something calculating behind his eyes, as if he were sizing her up, deciding whether or not to strike. Then, with a dismissive wave, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading as he headed toward the exit. Amara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands were trembling. She hated that he could get under her skin like this, but she was also furious. Furious that no matter what she did, no matter how hard she worked, it would never be enough for him. He wasn't just testing her. He was trying to break her. But he wasn't going to win. The next day arrived with a cold, heavy fog settling over the office. Amara arrived early, determined to finalize the presentation before Max had any chance to criticize it. She wasn't going to let him humiliate her again. By the time the senior management meeting rolled around, she was ready. She entered the conference room with her head held high, carrying the updated presentation and a quiet, simmering confidence that today would be different. Max was already there, seated at the head of the table, flanked by the executives. He gave her a small nod as she entered, his expression neutral but his eyes watching her like a hawk. Amara set up her laptop and began her presentation. She was clear, concise, and professional, every point backed by solid data, every slide polished. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of Max's gaze on her, searching for a crack, waiting for her to falter. But she didn't. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then one of the executives nodded approvingly. "Well done, Amara," he said. "That was exactly what we needed." A flicker of relief washed over her, but she didn't allow herself to relax just yet. She could still feel Max watching her, his silence unnerving. Then he spoke, his voice measured, almost casual. "It was fine," he said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "But I think it lacked vision." Amara's heart dropped. She stared at him, unsure of what to say. The executives exchanged confused glances. Max continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "Amara's presentation was adequate, but I was hoping for something more innovative, more aligned with our goals here. It feels like she's still trying to catch up, still learning the ropes." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Maybe it's just a lack of experience. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy with condescension. The executives looked from Max to Amara, clearly unsure how to respond. Amara's pulse quickened, her skin burning with humiliation. She had done everything right, and still, he found a way to twist it, to undermine her in front of everyone. "I appreciate the feedback," she said quietly, her voice steady but her anger barely contained. "I'll make improvements as necessary." Max smiled again, the kind of smile that said he had already won. The meeting wrapped up, and Amara quickly gathered her things, her mind racing. She had expected this, knew he would try to sabotage her, but it didn't make the sting any less painful. As she walked back to her desk, her phone buzzed with a text from David. "You okay?" Amara stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "He's not going to stop." David's reply came quickly. "No, he won't. Not unless you stop him first." This section deepens the psychological warfare between Amara and Max. She's doing everything she can to stay afloat, but Max continues to find ways to break her, to humiliate her in front of others. The tension between them is slowly escalating, with Max's mask slipping more and more, revealing the predator underneath. Amara sat at her desk, staring blankly at her screen. The successful presentation should have left her feeling triumphant, but Max had found a way to poison even that victory. His critique, adequate but lacking vision, echoed in her mind like a taunt. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her, but all she could think about was how effortlessly he had humiliated her in front of the executives. She could still see the way they looked at her, doubt flickering in their eyes, just as Max intended. Her phone vibrated again, another text from David. "We need to talk." Amara sighed, her stomach twisting in knots. David had been her only confidant, but even his advice felt hollow. How many times had he told her to be careful, to keep her head down? How many times had he watched from the sidelines while Max picked her apart piece by piece? She glanced around the office. It was late afternoon, and people were beginning to pack up for the day. But Max, he never left early. He lingered, always watching, always waiting. Amara could feel the pressure building. Every day she stayed, every task he assigned was like a step deeper into a trap he had laid. She had to do something, but what? Her eyes flicked over to Max's office. He was on the phone, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating smug grin on his face. Something inside her snapped. She couldn't take it anymore. He wanted her to break? Fine. But it wasn't going to happen in the way he expected. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag and phone, shooting a quick text to David. "Meet me in the break room. Now!" She walked briskly to the small, windowless break room at the end of the hall, her heart hammering in her chest. David arrived a few moments later, his face pale, eyes wide with concern. "Amara, what's going on?" he asked, shutting the door behind him. She took a deep breath, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "Max, he's not going to stop. He's never going to stop. I can't keep letting him do this to me." David frowned. I know. But what can you do? HR won't help. They'll protect him. They always do." Amara stopped pacing, turning to face him. "I don't care about HR anymore. I need to expose him, David. He's been doing this for years, right? You said it yourself. There were others before me. It's time someone put an end to it." David's face paled even more. "Amara, you don't understand. Max has connections. If you try to take him down without solid proof, he'll crush you. He's done it before. You can't just—" "I'm not going to wait around until he destroys my career," Amara interrupted, her voice firm. "I need proof. Real proof. I need something that HR, the executives, or even the public can't ignore. Something undeniable." David hesitated, glancing nervously at the door. "What are you thinking?" Amara's mind raced. She had been documenting Max's behavior for months, but it had never felt like enough. She needed something concrete, something damning. And then it hit her. Emails. "There have to be emails or messages," she said, her voice low but urgent. "He's too arrogant not to have left some kind of trail. If I can get access to his computer, I might find something that proves what he's been doing." David's eyes widened. "Amara, that's crazy. If you get caught—" "I won't get caught," she said, her mind already made up. "And even if I do, it'll be worth it." David swallowed hard, clearly torn. "Look, I hate what he's doing to you, what he's done to everyone. But if you go down this road, there's no going back. You're taking a huge risk." Amara met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I know, but I'd rather risk everything than let him win." David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Okay, I'll help, but we need to be careful." The plan was simple. Wait until after hours, when most of the office had cleared out, and use David's position in IT to access Max's computer. David had administrative clearance to fix any system issues that arose, and while it was risky, he could claim he was doing a routine security check if anyone asked. Max often stayed late, but his attention would be focused elsewhere. Meetings, calls, anything but his computer. The minutes dragged by, and the suspense was almost unbearable. Amara watched from her desk as the office gradually emptied out. Max was still in his office, but she noticed him glance at his watch, clearly preparing to leave soon. Finally, around 7 p.m., the moment arrived. Max walked out of his office, his phone pressed to his ear, heading toward the elevators. He didn't even glance in her direction, which was just as well. David gave her a quick nod from across the room. It was time. They moved swiftly, not saying a word as they entered Max's office. David pulled out a small USB drive and plugged it into Max's computer, typing quickly to bypass the password. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every second felt like an eternity. Amara stood by the door, her ears straining for any sound, her heart pounding in her chest. If Max came back, if anyone caught them— There, David whispered, pulling up Max's email. What are we looking for? Anything that shows he's been targeting me, or anyone else. Emails to HR, messages to other managers, anything. They scrolled through the emails, and at first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then they hit pay dirt. Max had sent a series of emails to HR, marked confidential, complaining about Amara's attitude and unprofessional behavior. In one email, he had referred to her as difficult and suggested that she might not be the right fit for the company's culture. The language was coded but unmistakably racist, designed to paint her as a problem without explicitly saying it. But that wasn't the worst of it. David froze, his eyes widening as he opened another file, a message thread between Max and another manager. Max Everett. She's cracking. I give her another month, maybe less, before she quits. I've always set the wheels in motion with HR just in case. Manager good. Can't have people like her messing up the team dynamic. Keep up the pressure and she'll fold. Max Everett. Don't worry. She'll break. They always do. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she read the messages, her hands shaking. There it was. Proof that Max had been orchestrating her downfall from the beginning. This was what he did. He pushed people until they broke, then painted them as unfit or unstable. And the company let him do it. This is it, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and relief. This is what we need. David nodded, quickly downloading the emails onto the USB drive. Okay, let's get out of here before someone catches us. They left the office quietly, the weight of what they had just uncovered hanging between them. Amara could barely contain her emotions. The anger, the vindication, the fear of what would happen next. She had the proof now, but what would she do with it? She couldn't trust HR. They were part of the problem, complicit in Max's abuse. No, she needed to go bigger. She needed to take this outside the company, to the public. Exposing Max wasn't just about saving herself anymore. It was about exposing the whole rotten system that allowed men like him to thrive. The next day, Amara could feel the tension in the office as soon as she walked in. Max was in an unusually good mood, smiling and joking with his colleagues, as if he had already won. But Amara knew something he didn't. She had spent the night planning her next move, and it was time to put it into action. Max walked past her desk, pausing just long enough to give her a condescending smile. I hope you're ready for the big meeting today. The execs are expecting nothing less than perfection. Amara nodded, forcing a tight smile. I'm ready. As soon as Max was out of earshot, Amara opened her laptop and composed an email. She attached the files she and David had retrieved, along with a detailed account of Max's behavior, and sent it to every executive in the company. But that wasn't all. She also sent it to a journalist she knew, a woman who had covered stories of workplace harassment and discrimination before. This was bigger than just Max now. The world needed to see the kind of man he was. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within hours, whispers spread through the office, and by the end of the day, the story had gone public. Max's emails were leaked to the press, and the company was scrambling to do damage control. Max was called into a meeting with HR and the executives, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time. Amara watched from her desk as he walked past, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. By the end of the week, Max was gone. Fired. His reputation in ruins. But it didn't stop there. The story of his abuse went viral, and soon, other victims came forward, former employees who had suffered under Max's reign of terror. The company faced a massive public backlash, and they had no choice but to issue a public apology. Amara, however, had already made her decision. She wasn't staying in a place that had allowed Max to thrive for so long. She handed in her resignation, her head held high. She had won, but more importantly, she had exposed the truth. As she walked out of the building for the last time, the sun setting behind her, Amara felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. She hadn't just survived Max's abuse. She had destroyed him. The ripple effects of the scandal hit the company like a tsunami. Max had tried to play his cards carefully, but now, with the emails public and his manipulation exposed, he was utterly defenseless. The HR department, so complicit in its silence, was scrambling to contain the damage, but it was too late. The media had picked up the story, and it spread like wildfire. Corporate predator unmasked. Racist power plays in the workplace. Amara watched the chaos unfold from a distance. Her resignation already submitted, her desk cleared of personal belongings. She wasn't interested in seeing Max's demise up close. She wanted to walk away from it all, knowing she had delivered the final blow that would ruin him and possibly the entire toxic culture that had allowed him to thrive for so long. The day Max was called into a crisis meeting with the executives was a day no one in the office would forget. He had swaggered into work that morning, wearing the same smug smile that had once made Amara's blood boil. But the energy around the office was different now, tense, electric. People were whispering, eyes following Max as he walked past, no longer with admiration or fear, but with judgment. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he was just too arrogant to care. An hour later, the glass doors of the executive boardroom closed behind him. The atmosphere in that room was ice cold. Senior executives sat on one side of the long mahogany table, all of them stone-faced, reviewing the damning emails and the mounting external pressure from the media. Max, for the first time since Amara had known him, looked nervous. "Max," began one of the higher-ups, Ellen, the head of operations, "I think you know why we've called this meeting." Max forced a smile, though beads of sweat had begun to form at his temples. "Look, I can explain. This whole thing is being blown way out of proportion. Those emails. There's nothing to explain.